A city once stood on the banks of the Euphrates, gleaming with towers and gates so grand that even its enemies called it the Gate of the Gods. This was Babylon, rich beyond comprehension, dazzling in its beauty, intoxicating in its power. But beneath the surface of gold and glory, shadows stretched long across its streets. Babylon's splendor was matched only by its appetite for excess, its devotion to pleasures that left scars on history. So deep ran its reputation for corruption that long after its walls crumbled, the very name Babylon became synonymous with sin. Ask yourself, how does a city that once ruled half the known world become remembered, not for greatness, but for wickedness? The paradox of Babylon is one of history's most gripping stories. On one hand, it was the crown jewel of Mesopotamia, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the first great civilizations were born. Babylon was home to legendary marvels, the Ishtar Gate, tiled in brilliant blue and adorned with lions and dragons. The Hanging Gardens, a wonder so extraordinary that ancient travelers claimed it rivaled paradise itself. Its walls were said to stretch so wide that chariots could race atop them. To walk into Babylon was to step into the beating heart of ancient power, a place where kings defied gods and men bent nature itself to their will. Yet, on the other hand, Babylon's fame became its curse. Ancient accounts describe a city overflowing with indulgence. Temples doubled as brothels, where priestesses of Ishtar carried out rites that blurred the line between worship and lust. Wealth poured into its markets: gold, spices, jewels, only to be squandered in feasts of staggering extravagance. Its laws, carved in stone by Hammurabi centuries earlier, promised order and justice, yet power too often bent them toward cruelty. From the pride of Nebuchadnezzar II, who built monuments to his own glory, to the drunken folly of Belshazzar, who mocked sacred treasures at a banquet, Babylon's kings set the stage for a city that climbed higher and higher, only to teeter at the edge of ruin. And so Babylon became a paradox burned into human memory, a city both celebrated and condemned, a place of wonder and of warning. For thousands of years, poets, prophets, and historians have argued over its legacy. Was it the height of civilization, proof of humanity's limitless creativity, or was it the ultimate cautionary tale, where pride and decadence brought an empire to its knees? The ruins scattered across Iraq whisper fragments of an answer, but the story of Babylon is far more than broken bricks. It is a mirror, reflecting the temptations and dangers that haunt every age. Subscribe now, because stories like Babylon's are buried under the sands of time, and without you they vanish again. To step into Babylon was to be swallowed by a world that overwhelmed the senses. The city rose from the desert like a dream of stone and clay, its walls so high they seemed to scrape the heavens, its gates painted in a brilliant lapis blue that glowed beneath the Mesopotamian sun. The Ishtar Gate, adorned with rows of striding lions and dragons, announced to every visitor that they had entered no ordinary city, but the seat of divine power on earth. Within those walls lay a metropolis alive with energy, avenues crowded with merchants shouting their wares, stalls overflowing with jewels, incense, and spices from lands as far away as India and Egypt, and canals threading the city like veins of life. To walk through Babylon was to move through a carnival of wealth and ambition, a place where humanity's hunger for greatness was matched only by its hunger for pleasure. The temples stood at the heart of this wonder, towering ziggurats stretched into the sky, colossal staircases meant to bridge heaven and earth. Priests in elaborate robes burned offerings of meat and incense, filling the air with thick clouds of smoke that curled upward like prayers to the gods. And yet, these houses of worship were not only places of devotion. Ancient sources describe how the temple of Ishtar, goddess of love and war, drew countless women, some willing, some not, who were compelled to surrender their bodies in what was called a sacred rite. They were expected to lie with strangers, offering themselves once in their life to honor the goddess. To outsiders, this practice became the darkest symbol of Babylon's corruption. Worship had been twisted into indulgence. What was sacred was tangled with what was carnal. Even outside the temples, the streets of Babylon pulsed with excess. Wine flowed in great amphorae, intoxicating entire gatherings, until night blurred into day. Festivals honoring the gods often collapsed into spectacles of chaos, drunken revelry, orgiastic celebrations, and wild dances where pleasure drowned restraint. The markets, bursting with treasures brought by endless caravans, became arenas of greed, and behind this glittering surface, the cruelty of power simmered. Hammurabi's Code, one of the earliest attempts at written law, had promised fairness, yet in practice it revealed the sharp edge of control. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, was justice, but only if you belonged to the right class. For the poor, for slaves, for women, the law was less a shield than a chain. Babylon's brilliance was built on inequality and suffering, a truth too often hidden behind its walls. Even its king seemed to embody the contradiction. Nebuchadnezzar II expanded Babylon into the largest city in the known world, raising palaces and gardens so magnificent that foreign visitors compared them to paradise. Yet he also became infamous for his arrogance, demanding subjects worship him almost as a god. His successors would go further still. Belshazzar, the last great ruler of Babylon, presided over a city where feasts stretched until dawn, where golden vessels taken from conquered temples were used to toast the glory of kings, while enemies massed outside the walls. Babylon's rulers believed their city could never fall. The Euphrates fed their people. Their walls towered over any foe. Their gods had favored them with riches beyond imagining. But with each act of pride, with each night of excess, the empire crept closer to its downfall. Was Babylon the height of civilization, or the blueprint for decadence that destroys empires? Its story reveals a haunting truth. Greatness and ruin often walk hand in hand. What was once hailed as the marvel of the ancient world began to serve as a warning. Babylon was not merely a city of kings. It became the symbol of arrogance, indulgence, and corruption. The stakes were no longer about one city's. Babylon had become a mirror for every empire that followed, a warning that even the mightiest walls cannot protect a people who destroy themselves from within. From world wonder, Babylon was already transforming into a world war. In the temple of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, devotion took a form that blurred the line between worship and sin. At the height of Babylon's glory, rituals were carried out that stunned even the city's allies and horrified its enemies. One rite, known by later historians as the sacred marriage, bound the king or high priest to a ceremonial union with a priestess, analyzing the union of divine and human power. But what began as symbolic devotion spiraled into something far darker. Ancient accounts describe how women, daughters of noblemen and peasants alike, were compelled at least once in their lifetime to enter the temple of Ishtar and lie with a stranger. Some came willingly, offering their beauty as a sacred duty, but others entered with dread, forced to surrender their bodies in the name of a goddess. Coins clinked as men paid the temple, and each act was framed as holy. What outsiders saw was not devotion, but degradation, a faith corrupted into indulgence, and the temples were only one layer of Babylon's excess. As the city grew richer, its festivals grew wilder. To walk through Babylon during a celebration was to move through chaos, disguised as worship. Rivers of wine poured into great goblets, until entire crowds stumbled in drunken delirium. Fires blazed as animals were sacrificed in numbers that staggered the imagination. Men and women alike stripped inhibitions in dances that merged ritual with frenzy, orgy with sacrifice. The gods were invoked with every toast, every cheer, every gasp of pleasure. Yet beneath the smoke of incense and roasted meat, what remained was a city gorging itself on its own wealth. To those watching from afar, Babylon was no longer the jewel of Mesopotamia. It was a spectacle of arrogance, a warning written in flesh and fire. Cruelty too was woven into this spectacle. Justice, as carved centuries earlier into Hammurabi's scales, had been reduced to spectacle. Public punishments and executions turned law into theater, with offenders displayed before the masses. A thief might lose a hand beneath the jeering gaze of a crowd, A woman accused of adultery could be bound and drowned in the Euphrates. To the Babylonians, this was order. To their critics, it was barbarism parading as civilization. This tension reached its peak during the reign of Belshazzar. His father Nabonidus had retreated into exile, leaving the young prince to govern Babylon. History remembers Belshazzar, not for wisdom or strength, but for a single night, a feast that became prophecy. In the midst of war, with Cyrus the Great of Persia pressing at Babylon's borders, Belshazzar threw a banquet unlike any before it. Thousands of nobles crowded into his halls, lit by the glow of torches against walls plated with gold. Musicians filled the air with rhythm, dancers swayed, and fountains of wine poured endlessly. But this was no ordinary feast. Belshazzar demanded the sacred vessels, once looted from the Temple of Jerusalem, into golden cups, once consecrated to another god. The Babylonians poured their wine. They lifted the vessels in mockery, toasting the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. It was at that moment, according to the biblical account, that the feast turned to terror. From the shadows of the hall a hand appeared, disembodied, its fingers glowing in the torchlight. Across the plaster of the palace wall, it wrote words none could understand. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. Silence fell over the revelers. Wine spilled from trembling hands. Their king's face turned pale, his knees knocking in fear. The message was clear once Daniel, the Hebrew captive, was summoned to interpret it. The days of Belshazzar's kingdom were numbered. It had been weighed and found wanting. It would be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, while the city feasted, the Euphrates was diverted, and Cyrus's soldiers marched beneath Babylon's towering walls. Through the riverbed, without a battle, the invincible city fell. The world's greatest wonder had collapsed, not in fire and war, but in pride and drunken carelessness. The same walls that had inspired awe became the silent witnesses of downfall. The same feasts that proclaimed Babylon's glory had hastened its ruin. In the end, it was not a god, nor a rival empire alone that destroyed Babylon. It was Babylon itself, rotted by decadence, blinded by arrogance, consumed by its sins, until it could no longer see the danger at its gate. Comment below if you lived in Babylon that night. Would you have been feasting or flee? The fall of Babylon came not with the roar of armies battering its gates, but with silence. The city whose walls were said to be impregnable, whose towers stretched toward the heavens, collapsed in a single night, without resistance. Cyrus the Great diverted the Euphrates River, slipping his soldiers beneath the mighty fortifications that had terrified generations of enemies. By morning, the feast was over, the palace was breached, and Belshazzar lay dead. The kingdom that had once called itself eternal was scattered, its throne toppled, its gods silenced. Babylon, jewel of the ancient world, had been reduced to just another prize of empire. What remained in the wake of that night was not only rubble, but a reputation that would echo across centuries. For the Persians who inherited it, Babylon became another jewel in a growing crown, a city to be ruled rather than revered. For the Greeks, who came later under Alexander the Great, it was a city of ruins and fading legends, its gardens overgrown, its temples half empty. Yet for the Hebrews who had lived through Babylonian conquest and captivity, the city's downfall became more than history. It became prophecy fulfilled. Babylon was remembered not for its marvels, but for its sins, not for its beauty, but for its arrogance. The very name Babylon transformed from a city on a map into a symbol of corruption and divine judgment. The legacy of Babylon was as much myth as memory. Generations of storytellers and prophets pointed to its fall as proof that no power, however dazzling, can defy the consequences of its own pride. In the book of Isaiah, Babylon was condemned as the beauty of kingdoms, the glory of the Chaldees' pride, destined to become like Sodom and Gomorrah. In the book of Revelation, centuries later, Rome itself was cast as Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of abominations of the earth. The name endured not as praise, but as curse. To be called Babylon was to be called decadent, corrupt, doomed to destruction. And so, while its walls crumbled and its gardens vanished into dust, Babylon lived on in memory, reshaped into a cautionary tale. The prophets told of its arrogance, the priests preached of its sins, and historians used it as the standard by which to measure excess. Every empire that rose after it carried a shadow of Babylon. When cities grew too rich, when kings grew too proud, when people drowned themselves in indulgence, critics whispered the same word, Babylon. It became less a place than an idea, a ghostly warning that no society is too great to fall. What is most haunting is how little survives of the city itself. The Hanging Gardens, if they existed, left no trace. The Ishtar Gate, rebuilt from fragments, now stands in a museum in Berlin, far from the Euphrates. The once mighty ziggurat lies in ruin, its bricks scattered, its steps eroded by time. All that remains are the broken bones of a city that once called itself the center of the world. Babylon's fate is carved not in stone, but in memory, and yet the echoes remain disturbingly relevant. Cities today glitter with towers of glass instead of baked brick. Markets overflow not with spices and gold, but with endless consumer goods. Temples have been replaced by skyscrapers, yet the same temptations creep in. Indulgence without restraint, power without humility, wealth without justice. Babylon's story is not only about the past, it is about the cycle of history. The reminder that civilizations fall not just by the sword, but by their own sins. If you don't like and share this story, Babylon's sins and its lessons will be forgotten all over again. Every empire believes itself to be eternal. Babylon believed it. Rome believed it. Countless kingdoms after them believed it. Yet history repeats the same truth. No matter how high the walls, no matter how rich the coffers, no matter how proud the ruler's decadence rots a nation from within, Babylon's ruins are not only relics of the past, they are warnings for the present. The city that once crowned itself the gate of the gods fell, not because its walls were weak, but because its people mistook excess for strength and indulgence for immortality. The story of Babylon is not just about kings and conquests. It is about the universal danger of forgetting that wealth without morality collapses like sand in the tide. Babylon had its hanging gardens, its towers, its endless treasures, but all of it could not save it from the rot at its core. The feasts, the cruelty, the arrogance of its rulers, these were the termites chewing through its foundations. The Persians didn't defeat Babylon in a glorious war. Babylon defeated itself long before Cyrus marched beneath its walls. That is why the handwriting on Belshazzar's palace wall feels so haunting even today. You have been weighed, you have been measured, and you have been found wanting. Look around at the world now. Our towers are taller than Babylon's, our cities richer than Nebuchadnezzar's, our technology more powerful than the dreams of any Mesopotamian priest. But are we so different? Markets overflow, not with spices and gold, but with endless consumer goods. Entertainment consumes us, distractions multiply, and indulgence parades itself as progress. Justice bends to power, wealth shields the guilty, and pride blinds leaders who think their throne's unshakable. We live in an age where every city could one day be called Babylon, and the same question echoes through time. Will we learn from its fall, or will we repeat it? Babylon teaches that greatness without humility is temporary. Its temples rose to the skies, but its worship was hollow. Its laws were carved in stone, but justice was corrupt. Its kings declared themselves chosen of the gods, yet could not outlast their own arrogance. Civilization is not sustained by bricks, armies, or monuments. It is sustained by balance between wealth and justice, between faith and humility, between indulgence and restraint. When that balance breaks, collapse is inevitable, whether in 539 BCE or today. That is why Babylon's memory still haunts us. It reminds us that empires fall not only from the outside but from the inside. They are not destroyed by enemies alone, but by greed, arrogance, and moral decay. The story of Babylon is not meant to amuse us as ancient history. It is meant to sting, to force us to look inward. So I ask you, look at today's cities, the neon lights, the skyscrapers, the wealth flowing through digital veins. Are we truly so different from Babylon? Or are we dancing at the same feast, raising the same golden cups, blind to the writing already on our own wall? Babylon dazzled the world, and then disappeared overnight. Its walls that once seemed invincible became ruins. Its gardens, once counted among the wonders of the world, vanished into myth. Its kings, who believed themselves immortal, were reduced to names in broken tablets. The city that called itself eternal proved to be fleeting, a reminder carved into history that the higher you climb in sin, the harder the fall. Yet Babylon's story does not end in its own ashes. It lingers like a shadow over every empire that came after. The warning it whispered on that final night, that pride blinds, that excess weakens, that arrogance destroys, echoes across time, waiting for us to listen. Will we? Or are we too busy feasting, too busy raising golden cups, to notice the writing on our own walls? But Babylon was not the only empire that feasted its way to death. The Romans too, with their endless banquets and blood-soaked arenas, pushed indulgence to its breaking point. Their tables groaned under dishes so grotesque that even emperors could not stomach them. In our next story, we uncover the truth behind Rome's excess, the banquets that ended in blood, the meals that turned into death sentences, and the empire that thought itself eternal, until gluttony hollowed it out. If you leave without subscribing, these warnings from the past vanish forever, and history will repeat itself.